court is taking an afternoon recess. This recess usually lasts about 15 to 20 minutes long, and they usually take it right around 3:45 if yesterday is any example. So Ken Belkin is still here with me, and we just heard this testimony from the medical examiner. One thing I will say about this case, Ken, is it's extremely efficient. There's not a lot of beating around the bush. The prosecutor goes right straight to the key testimony that he needs, and maybe that's just because of the way that the case is being tried legally. You know, they don't need to prove motive. They just need to prove that someone died during the commission of another felony. So there are parts of a normal murder trial that we're not seeing here. Yeah. But still, I think that this judge and the attorneys on both sides are not taking a lot of time to ask loosey-goosey questions of the witnesses. They're just going right straight into it, getting the information out and letting the jury think about it.
I mean, I think they're inundating us with witnesses to prove that Ms. Chambers is dead. This is not in dispute. They haven't really loaded us up with anything so relevant to point the finger at the defendant. You know, I think we've got DNA evidence on a set of keys. You know, presumably he's been involved with this girl for a little bit of time, been in a relationship with her. His DNA just might have been on those keys as in the natural course of their relationship. As I've said to you many times sitting here at this table, you're probably covered in my DNA from 2 weeks ago.
Which is disturbing enough to think about. But look, I mean, yes, we shed skin cells, you know, our DNA winds up. I mean, my DNA is probably here. It's probably in my desk behind.
I just put Deborah Blum in a headlock about 30 minutes ago.
You know, that's interesting that you're
and I'm
admitting
sure
to that.
I'm going to be covered in her DNA for 2 months, and her makeup probably for a couple of weeks.
Hey, look, you know, just so the audience knows, Ken and Deborah used to work together, so they have a friendly rivalry, which does spill over here into the LawNewz studio. Usually it's kept off camera, but I did indeed witness this little fight between the two of them in case I need to be called to the witness stand about it. But
she started it.
You know, I don't know about that. My memory's fuzzy on that issue.
Well, so, your memory's fuzzy. We're going to impeach you on your statements now.
Well, you know, hey, look, I'm more afraid of Deborah than I am you, so we'll just leave it at that. So look, I mean, you know, I agree with you, yes, the state is putting every witness on the stand that it possibly can, but, you know, some of these witnesses are playing right into the defense's hand with this whole testimony about the victim saying that the person who did this to her was Eric.
Yeah.
You know, look, I mean, I get that the state wants to bring that up to prevent the defense from having the first bite at the apple, but that's really damaging for the state's case.
Some key things to take away from this case right now. First off, the case is purely circumstantial. There are no eyewitnesses. There's no surveillance footage tying him there. They've got some DNA evidence. They've got the fact that, you know, he lied about being with her earlier in the day, that they had sexual intercourse earlier in the day, you know, and, you know, that doesn't prove that he murdered her. The DNA on the keys doesn't prove that he murdered her. And quite frankly, putting all that aside, that it's not really proof that he killed her, the fact that she named this other person when asked, and 8 people heard it pretty clearly, that's a big problem for the prosecution. It's an enormous hurdle to overcome.
Yes, it is, and it's one of several investigatory issues with this case. We had a couple other ones pop up yesterday. We started to talk about them before they called the break here. What do you make of the keys being put back into the ditch just solely to be photographed? I mean, isn't that being careless with potential DNA evidence?
Yeah, it's just being careless with evidence, period. First of all, the crime scene's been tampered with. You know, arguably, that evidence should have been suppressed, and I'd be willing to bet that this was probably the subject of a pretrial motion and hearing to suppress that evidence. But, you know, court probably didn't rule in the defense's favor, which is why we're seeing it admitted now. I don't know that the evidence of the keys is so damning anyway. DNA
well, I agree
is
with
very
that point.
fickle.
You know, look, I mean, they knew one another for a couple of weeks. He was riding around in her car.
Yeah, he drove her car around.
The friend testified to that, so why is it a surprise that his DNA is on the keys, other than it bolsters what the friend said? But I don't think that the friend is really lying about that in any way. You know, so, look, I mean, the friend admitted that the victim was dealing marijuana. And, you know, we just heard evidence from the medical examiner that, yes, she had marijuana in her system, the victim, that is. So the friend wasn't necessarily trying to cover for the victim in this case. We should believe that the defendant was in her car as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm just not totally buying that this guy did it. And in my mind, it's the Eric thing. I keep coming back to this because it's tough. This person was asked who did this to you, and she said in two very clear statements that Eric did this to me. It was Eric that did this to me. You know, this is very tough to overcome. I just don't see, and apparently the defense is going to try and prove that at the time that this occurred, it couldn't have possibly been Mr. Tellis because he was out buying prepaid phone cards or something.
Some kind of a money transfer card. It's called a green dot card. Yes, and the defense says that the timeline suggests that the defendant was buying the card at the same time that the victim was being set on fire. Now, that's another big what if, and part of me wonders, you know, hey, look, is the time off on the computer receipts? Is the time off on the records? But also, is the time off on some of these cell phone records? Because the real key to the prosecution's case here is what's going on with the phones. But we know from other trials, the cell phone records, they're off all the time. And even the state admitted in its opening statement that they had to bring in another expert who realized that the first analysis of the cell phone records was wrong.
And by the way, what are these cell phone records evidence of? Evidence of the fact that he might have been in the area? Evidence of the fact that they spoke several times that day? So what? People speak on the phone all the time. It doesn't mean that the person you're speaking to, if they end up dead, it doesn't mean that you did it.
Well, I think that the way they're going at it is saying that, well, who else could have done it? Well, the answer is someone without a cell phone, okay, which is possible, or someone with an unknown cell phone. Okay, look, if she's dealing marijuana, and I mean no disrespect to the victim or her family, but if she's dealing marijuana, how was she making the deals? Did she have a burner phone? Was she meeting people in a certain area? And then we've got one of the investigators saying, oh yeah, there was other stuff, is his exact language, in the area where this car and where the victim was set on fire. There were beer cans and other stuff. Well, that almost sounds like the party spot outside town where maybe marijuana is being dealt. And I really think that the defense might bite into that as well. Almost every witness here has given the defense a little nugget to argue, and you know how to do cross-examination,
by the way,
Ken, just as well as I do. And the way that you do it is you take these little nuggets from every single one of the witnesses and you stitch them all together on closing arguments, and you say, look, this raises reasonable doubt.
And by the way, her affiliation with the drug trade, I think it's no secret that if you deal drugs or traffic in drugs, whether it be marijuana or cocaine or methamphetamine, whatever, you invite a certain level of potential violence into your life. And I can tell you this, I had a client who was a career marijuana dealer. He had his home invaded several times by rival drug dealers. One time put in a bathtub with a shotgun to his head. These things happen. Just because it's marijuana doesn't mean there's no potential for violence.
I want to go play a clip from earlier in the case. This is